said as I was writing this down, I completely forgot that I said I would come up with something for today. So, for your sonnet exam, choose any sonnet. Could be one we went over. Could be one we did not discuss at all. I don't care. I'll leave it up to you. 750 words or less. Explicate that sonnet. That's roughly 2.5 pages or less. Let me modify that. In 600 to 750 words. Why? Because you can't explicate any one of these sonnets in less than 2 pages. Because if I put 750 words or less, I can almost guarantee you I'll get a paragraph from somebody. You can't do that. That would almost be an automatic F. Okay, for stupidity, if nothing else. So, in 600 to 750 words, explicate the poem. Okay, double space, name at the top, all that kind of stuff. Use the format that's suggested in the syllabus for papers. The only external source you're allowed to use, other than the poem that you are citing, is either the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, or another dictionary. Do not use an online dictionary, unless it's like the OED. But don't use dictionary.com. Why? That will only give you modern, current, today meanings. The OED, one of the wonderful things about that, is you can go back and you can find how that word was used over time. It gives you the earliest usage, and then it traces the usage through time. Okay? You might find that helpful for some words. Don't automatically assume that you know the meaning of a particular word, especially if it's a noun or a verb or an adjective. Okay? Pronouns, pretty much same. Conjunctions, pretty much the same. Articles, pretty much the same. But nouns, adverbs, adjectives might have a slightly different meaning. There are also in the library, books on Shakespeare's language. Or you can find online guides to Shakespeare's language. Okay? Yeah, you can use those. If you cite the OED, just cite OED, give me the word. I'm not going to require for this for you to go through the full MLA 8th edition, which I absolutely detest anyways, guide. Okay? This is due a week from Thursday. So a little bit more time than I had than I'd given on the syllabus. Okay, any questions? All right, let's start Hamlet. Wore one of my Hamlet shirts from the RSC today. Hamlet, how many of you have read Hamlet before? Show of hands. Most of you have. How many of you have seen Hamlet? How many of you have seen all of Hamlet? All 4 hours. It takes 4 hours to produce Hamlet. It's the longest play there is by Shakespeare. If you saw Kenneth Branagh's 1996 film version, you saw all of Hamlet. It's the only film ever done that includes all of Hamlet. Okay? If you saw the Nashville Shakespeare Festival's Hamlet last fall or last winter, February I think it was, here in Murfreesboro, or January up in Nashville, you saw about half of Hamlet. That's how much was cut. Okay? So it's a long play, which means we have 2.5 days assigned. We're not going to do it in 2.5 days. I can guarantee you we're going to have to drop something later. For one reason, because it is such a long play, and because I do want to go through this one perhaps a little bit closer than we have some of the others. So we'll take 3 full days at least. Maybe more. And I haven't decided which play I'm going to drop yet. More than likely it'll be Othello. How many of you have read King Lear? Yeah, that's what I thought. How many of you have read Othello? Okay, about 4 or 5 of you. How many of you have read The Tempest? Anybody? Or seen Othello or The Tempest? Okay. How many of you seen Lear? Amazon Prime, if you're Amazon Prime members, has the latest version with Anthony Hopkins as Othello. Anthony Hopkins, I read an article, I don't know, a couple months ago, talking about this getting ready to come out. And Hopkins said that he played Othello when he was like 48. He's 80 now. And he said, when I played Othello at 48, I thought I could do Othello. Not Othello, King Lear. Said, when I played Lear at 48, I thought I could do Lear. He said, but now at 80, I realized you can't do Lear until you're at least 75 or 80. That is, the actor doing Lear really has got to be kind of close to Lear's age in order to fully pull off what Shakespeare is doing in that play, which is probably one of the reasons why we're going to do Lear. But also because it and Hamlet, they're the two greatest tragedies, I would argue, in any language. Even greater than Oedipus, even greater than the ancient Greek ones. So, Hamlet. Let me find another marker that works better. Yes. What do you know about Hamlet? He's a prince. What about his uncle?
His uncle marry his mom, kill his dad.
Okay. So the basic plot is louder.
His uncle kills his dad, marries his mom, and Hamlet kind of despises him for it.
His uncle kills his father, the uncle's brother, marries Hamlet's mother, the uncle's sister-in-law, takes the crown, and makes Hamlet upset. Do we have a modern version?
Lion King.
It's exactly it. The Lion King is Hamlet. Just different names, different country, or different continent, different species. Okay? It's probably that I was doing a little bit of prep for class, which I don't normally do. It's probable that basic idea is Indo-European. That is, it traces back to 4,000 to 5,000 BC. That this basic story about a brother killing his brother, taking the brother's wife, displacing the brother's son, goes back that far. Why? Because it shows up in Germanic language stuff. It shows up in Italic language stuff. It shows up in Indian language, Indian, these guys are not Native American, kind of stuff, okay? Which means Northern Europe, Southern Europe, the Indian subcontinent. The only way you get that kind of idea in all three means it's got to go back to the original of all three of those language groups, okay? We do know there's a pretty good, not direct source for Hamlet, but there's a pretty good source. Your introduction, I think, mentioned it, by Saxo Grammaticus in his Gesta Danorum, means the deeds of the Danes, okay, where he talks about, this is written in Latin, by the way, he is Danish, where he talks about Ambleth. It's Hamlet. It's a 13th century text, okay? This story, the Gesta Danorum, was widely available in Shakespeare's day in Latin. Now we know a French author, I can't remember his first name, named Belforest, translated that into French. Okay? We know Shakespeare knew French. Which work was it? As You Like It, I think. One of the comedies has as its primary source material, I think it's As You Like It, was by Belforest in French. Okay? That tells us Shakespeare had to know French. He also obviously had to know Latin. He writes in Latin in several of the plays. Okay? It's thought he knew some Greek. because some material seems to be coming directly from Greek sources and such. And because Ben Jonson said in his famous epitaph to Shakespeare, though he knew little Latin and less Greek. What that means is he had some Latin and he had a little bit less Greek. But the little Latin and less Greek is compared to Ben Jonson, who was a classicist, who knew Latin and Greek like he knew the back of his hands. So little Latin and less Greek compared to Ben Jonson, it'd be like, Carl Sagan knew a little astrophysics, compared to, I don't know, Stephen Hawking. Okay? That kind of comparison. So we get Hamlet. When is Hamlet written? According to your introduction, when is it written? Do we have a hard and fast date? No. Do we have a hard and fast date for almost any of Shakespeare's plays? That is, a specific year. Very few of them. Probably between 1599 and 1602. Okay? Who does Hamlet's name sound like? Hamnet. Hamlet was named after, his son, was named after a guy in Stratford named, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, Hamnet, I think Sadler. But this guy Hamnet Sadler also was called Hamlet Sadler. The two names, Hamnet, Hamlet, were interchangeable. Some scholars thought that Hamnet's death in 1596 might have kind of spurred this play. There's no proof. There's nothing that tells us that. Your text mentions, I believe, a possible what's called Hamlet. That is, an earlier version of the play, maybe around, that is in existence in the late 1580s, that Shakespeare drew upon for the writing of this play. Okay? Obviously, if he did, this predates the death of Hamlet. But Hamlet's born when? 1585. Okay? It's also thought possibly Shakespeare was the author of this Hamlet. Just means beginning, first. Okay? So this Hamlet has been postulated. The only problem is a copy has never been found. So that's one of those things, like if you could figure out who W.H. is, if you could find, or if you found the Hamlet, boy, you'd be famous. You'd be really, really famous. Why? Because it would show us a little bit, if we had that source, it would show us how Shakespeare, for this play at least, worked with this source material. We know how he worked with this source material for the English tetralogies, for example, because we know what that source was, or what those sources were. Samuel Daniels' Civil Wars, Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, Wales. I can never remember which of those two. Any other background stuff? Yeah, one other thing. Hamlet, I would argue, I don't remember what Bevington says, is perhaps the play with the most emphasis on Catholic versus Protestant ideas. Or, that's not a good way of putting it. It's the most religious of Shakespeare's plays, I think. And I could be wrong. And I'll point out where, okay, as we go through. And what I mean by that is Shakespeare seems to be weaving in ideas from current religious controversies. Okay? If it's written in the 1590s, it's written not too long after the Protestant Reformation begins, which begins when? Tomorrow is the 501st anniversary. 1517, 1031, when Martin Luther nails the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. Okay? Wittenberg's in this play. In what aspect? Hamlet is a student at Wittenberg. In Act 5, Scene 1, and I should have arranged it, and I probably had arranged it so that it would. Yeah, I did, actually. I had actually the syllabus all arranged so that we would be talking about this today and Thursday, because at the beginning of Act 4, I think it's Act 4, we're going to have a scene where Hamlet talks about a politic convention of worms. Okay? In 1521, and we'll talk about this later, Martin Luther was invited to the Diet of Worms. Worms, W-U-R-M-S. Diet. Another word for a diet is a convocation. Shakespeare uses a convocation of worms in the actual play. Okay? We'll talk about that when we get to it. All right, so let's start. Let's look at our dramatis personae. And one of the reasons, it's going to take us so long is because Acts 1 and Acts 2 are pretty long. Okay? So, according to how your dramatis personae are listed, you have the Ghost of Hamlet, former king of Denmark. Notice it's not Hamlet Sr. Why not call him Hamlet Sr.? Well, there's going to be a scene, Act 5, Scene 1, where two clowns / gravediggers are going to talk about somebody who's died. But in talking about the person who's died, they don't talk about the person as a person. Why? Because the person is dead. That is, the body that's being put in the ground is not the person. The person has fled. So, on that logic, you don't talk about the Ghost of Hamlet Sr. Why? Because there's only one Hamlet alive. Okay? So, Ghost of Hamlet, former king of Denmark. Then you have Claudius, king of Denmark, former king's brother. Gertrude, queen of Denmark, widow of the former king, and now wife of Claudius. What does that immediately tell us? What's wrong with that image? Louder, Thomas.
Incest.
It's incest. Okay. In Hamlet does exist, the play is set within a Christian society. Okay. Then you have Polonius, counselor to the king, Laertes his son, Ophelia his daughter, Reynaldo his servant, who is a spy, actually. Then you have Horatio, Hamlet's fellow student and friend. And then you have a bunch of members of the Danish court. These are all, in one sense or another, servants to courtiers of the king, Claudius. Okay? Voltimand, who's an ambassador. Cornelius, also an ambassador. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, or Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, doesn't matter which way you call them, because they're faceless. They can be either one. Just don't do Rosenstern and Guildenkrantz. Okay? I had one student write a paper about Rosenstern and Guildenkrantz, all throughout. Tom Stoppard had a famous play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, written in 66, 68. Great play, by the way. Osric, a gentleman, a lord, etc. Then you have the officers, soldiers on watch, Bernardo Franciscus Marcellus, Fortinbras, Prince of Norway, and a captain in his army, and then some actors, and then, quote-unquote, clowns, Gravedigger and his companions. So, a bunch of people enter. You have a bunch of people at the, bunch of lords, soldiers, attendants, etc. So, Act 1, Scene 1, enters or begins with a question. Who's there? Now, what does who's there imply?
Can't see.
Multiple things. Can't see. What else?
Someone's there.
Possibly someone's there. What about the person who's calling who's there? Can't see, Nikki said, but what else? Okay, heard something.
He's supposed to be alone.
Go back to the can't see. If the person can't see, what is the person trying to do? Trying to see. In other words, who's there implies somebody is on the lookout. Okay? Watching. Notice, they're sentinels. Okay? I'm going to erase this. So hopefully you got it written down. One of the images, let's say, maybe not the best term, maybe theme, or images that dominates this play is seeing, watching, observing. Notice, each of those means something slightly differently. And then the last one, spying. We will see Ophelia refer to Hamlet as the observed of all observers. Okay? Who's there? Nay, answer me. Stand and fold yourself. And Bernardo replies, long live the king. That's kind of like a password. Bernardo? Yeah. Okay. So what time is it? 2 lines down. 'Tis now struck 12. It's midnight. Later, that's going to be called the witching time of night. Okay? That's the time when witches get out and, cue the lines from Macbeth with their cauldrons and toil, whatever it is. So, Francisco says, thank you, I'm cold and I'm sick at heart. Quiet guard, not a mouse stirring. Clemens took that for the visit of St. Nicholas, not a mouse stirring, etc. So, Horatio and Marcellus come in. And Horatio asks, skipping several lines, down about 25, has this thing appeared again tonight? Notice, this thing, not, has he appeared again tonight? Why doesn't he call this thing he or him? Louder? They're not sure, right? They don't know what this thing is that they've seen. Bernardo, I haven't seen anything. Marcellus. Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy. What does he mean by fantasy? Imaginations. Remember what Theseus says about imagination? It bodies forth the forms of things unknown. Okay? Marcellus is saying that Horatio says we have overactive imaginations and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. He won't let belief take hold of him. Put that in kind of more modern colloquial speech. He doesn't believe us. But it's more than that. He doesn't believe what? The vision. He doesn't believe what they have seen. Okay? And I could be wrong, but I think because of Shakespeare's use throughout his works of the Bible, that he might have a biblical text in mind here. Thomas. What happens to Thomas after Christ is resurrected? He doesn't believe. Yeah, Christ shows himself to the 2 disciples on the way to the road to Emmaus. They come back to tell the other disciples. Okay. Peter and John, meanwhile, have run to the tomb. The tomb's empty. They haven't seen Jesus, but they've seen the empty tomb. Jesus appears to the disciples or to the apostles. Thomas isn't there. So that's the second time he's appeared to some of them. Thomas comes back, is with them, and they say, we've seen the Lord. And the two on the way to the road to Emmaus could say, we've seen him twice. That is, twice we've seen this thing. Okay, Bernardo says, or Marcellus says. And then the third time, the apostles are all together in the upper room, door is locked, and Jesus, quote unquote, appears. Taps Thomas on the shoulder, because Thomas says, unless I put my finger in the hole in his hand and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. Come on. And Thomas says, I believe. Blessed are you, for you've seen and believed. More blessed are those who haven't seen and believed. Okay? So, he will not let belief take hold of him. Why else not? Well, you kind of have to jump to the very end of the play. Because we're going to hear Horatio. Notice what kind of name is that? And even Marcellus and Bernardo. Where's the play set? It's in Denmark. Marcellus, Bernardo, Horatio are all what?
Spanish?
Italian. Roman names. Okay? Horatio is a Stoic. Now, what does a Stoic believe? Well, kind of life sucks and then you die. So what do you have to do when life sucks really bad? How do you deal with it? You don't. We were talking about the sonnets and the experiences of love. You go down, you go up, you go down, etc. You don't go up and down. Stoic's ideal is an even keel. You don't let life get to you. You also don't get euphoric highs. You're kind of passionless. You take it all in stride. Why? Because if you experience that euphoric high, what do you know is going to happen? You're going to crash. Okay? Don't do that. So we're going to have Hamlet later on, at the end of this act, tell Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. Why? Because Horatio's philosophy, to a Stoic philosophy, this is it. This is everything, and then you die. And Hamlet's saying, there's a little bit more than that. There are things you can't see that are real. So, he will not let belief take hold of him. So, we told him to come along. Okay? Horatio, won't happen. It won't appear. Why not? Why does Horatio think it won't appear? Whatever this thing is, because we're not told yet.
It's an imagination, and obviously he's not going to imagine it because he's not given to flights of fancy. He is Stoic.
And because, in his philosophy, it's impossible. He lives in what is called a closed system. That is, the entire universe is only what can be seen, evaluated, tested, objectified. He is, in what would modern terms be called a materialist or a logical positivist. Okay? Only that which can be proven is real. So, it won't appear. It's not real. So Bernardo says, now let's sit down and talk. And Bernardo starts to say, last night, the bell then beating 1. Well, we've been told just a few minutes earlier, the clock's already struck midnight. What other famous work of English literature kind of has key significant things begin with the clock striking midnight? Charles Dickens, A Christmas Carol. And what happens? A ghost appears. Marcellus, look! In the same figure like the king that's dead. Thou art a scholar, Marcellus says to Horatio. Speak to it. What does he mean? You're a scholar. Speaking ghosties? You know Latin. Speak to it in Latin. Why? What's a ghost?
Dead.
Okay, dead. Dead what? Dead person. Okay, where do ghosts come from? Heaven? No. They never come from heaven. They always come from one of the other places. If one is Catholic and believes in two other places, heaven, hell or purgatory. So speak to it in Latin. That's suggesting rites of exorcism. Okay? Cast it off. Bernardo, doesn't it look like the king? Horatio, yeah, it does. Harrows me with fear and wonder. Harrows. Scares the hell out of me. Have you ever heard of the Heroine of Hell? According to, not all quote-unquote Christian groups believe this. According to the early church, according to the medieval church, when Christ died, before he was resurrected, what did he do? He was dead, right? Okay, louder. He descended into hell. One version of the creed says, for what purpose? To free all those captive who looked forward to his coming. Okay? And that's the part, gets variously interpreted. Does that only mean the good righteous Jews like Abraham and David and Moses and all those guys? Because some of the early fathers of the church said, no, he went down, destroyed the gates of hell so that, if one takes this idea literally, there are no gates anymore. There's no door to hell. It's like a prison with no cell doors. So that those who are in hell are there because they want to be in hell. Because he went down, destroyed the doors, and said, follow me. And everybody who looked at him and said, Lord, followed him. Old English poem, The Dream of the Rood, describes this at the end of the poem. Okay? So when he says, it harrows me with fear and wonder, he's kind of saying, it takes possession of me with fear and wonder. Why fear?
Beyond his understanding of the word?
Beyond his understanding. Name, if you can, a very, very prominent, famous atheist who's alive today or who was alive 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, I found this on the web. Take a look.
This is really scary. Whoever's listening.
Serious.
Yeah, other than serious. Richard Dawkins, Hawking, Christopher Hitchens, died several years ago, famous journalist and such. Why do I say name one of them? Because for them, when you die, that's it. There's nothing. Nothing goes on. Well, obviously, with the dead king, something goes on. He's now making an appearance. Okay? The with fear is, this blows my mind. My mind doesn't allow for this possibility. Okay? So, speak to it. What art thou that usurps this time of night? See, we've spent 35 minutes and we're not even, we're 50 lines. Okay, so. Together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march. By heaven, I charge thee, speak. It's not clear whether or not Horatio actually believes in heaven per se, because he's a good Stoic. So, Marcellus says it's offended. How do we know? This is Shakespeare giving us stage directions. See, it stalks away. He doesn't say, see, it stalks away. And then Marcellus says, Oh, you offended it. Okay. So it leaves. No! How now, Horatio? In other words, okay, smarty pants, Mr. Scholar. Explain that. You tremble and look pale. Is not this something more than fantasy? That is, you saw it, I saw it, Marcellus saw it. Before my God. Now, I don't know if that's a sudden conversion experience or if he's a quote-unquote Christian Stoic, like a Christian existentialist. The idea meaning you got to make every moment your quote-unquote decision for Christ, so to speak. I might not this believe without the sensible and true avouch of mine own eyes. There's the St. Thomas moment. If I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. You need a modern, parable of that story of St. Thomas. Read Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. Fantastic short story. And she's talking about that. Is it not like the king? As you are to yourself. Well, how are you to yourself? It's a tautology, right? You are yourself. He's saying, it's not like the king. That is the king. So, Marcellus says, we've seen this twice now. Horatio, in what particular thought to work, I know not. But in the gross and scope of mine opinion, this isn't good. This bodes some strange eruption to our state. That is, something is going to rupture. That's what eruption there means. It doesn't mean like a volcanic eruption. It means something is going to split the country. Kind of appropriate for our times. So, Marcellus essentially asks, why are we standing watch? What's the purpose? We're not at open war. So Horatio says, well, I can answer that part. And he goes on and talks about what the previous king did, right? He defeated old Norway. So, young in Norway, Fortinbras, he's full of himself. And he's threatening things. Okay? So Bernardo says, I think you're right. I think it be no other, but even so. Horatio. Bernardo finishes. Well may it sort that this portentous figure comes armed through our watch so like the king that was and is the question of these wars. In other words, the old dead king kind of, is taking it upon himself even in afterlife to still protect. Horatio. A mote it is to trouble the mind's eye. What is that an example of? A mote, a speck of dust to trouble the mind's eye. A speck of dust to trouble the eye. That is a biblical allusion. What's it to? What about it?
Just like, don't look at somebody and say you have a splinter in your eye when you have a
Beam in your own eye. Don't. And what's the purpose of that parable?
don't look at other people and say you need to get your stuff together when your own stuff is.
Don't judge others. Okay? Without judging yourself first. Don't mete out to others. Why? Because how you mete out, M-E-T-E, not M-E-A-T, how you mete out to others, that's what's going to happen to you. So, he says it is a mote to do what? To trouble the mind's eye. That is, what is a speck of dust in your eye? What's it do? It irritates, right? It makes it so that you can't see correctly because you're doing this and your eye is watering. Okay? Take that speck of dust for a moment, put it in an oyster. What does oyster do after a while? It makes a pearl. So, he goes on and says, same kinds of things happened before Julius Caesar fell. Not a good beginning. Ghost comes back in. I'll cross it, though it blast me. What does he mean by cross it? Get in front of it. I'll cross its path. I'll oppose it. Though it blast me. Stay, illusion. Is it an illusion? It's real, right? So why does he call it an illusion? The ill part? Bad, negative, illusion, vision. It's an inappropriate sight. Why? What are you supposed to do when you die? Stay dead. Go away. Okay? If thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. If there be any good thing to be done, that may to thee do ease and grace to me, speak to me. If you can say anything that I can then bring ease to you or grace to me, grace comes from whom? God. Speak to me. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, that is, if you know the future, which haply foreknowing may avoid, speak. Or if thou hast uphoarded in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, if, while you were alive, you hoarded up treasure and you buried it in the earth, and you died, for which they say you spirits oft walk in death, speak of it. Why? Look, just the last part. Tell me where the treasure is. For what purpose? To dig it up and get rid of it. To distribute it. So, cock crows, ghost disappears. Bernardo, he was about to speak when the cock crew. Horatio, you know, I've heard, he says, that the cock doth with his lofty and shrill sounding throat awake the god of day, and at his warning, whether in sea or fire, in earth or air, the extravagant and erring spirit hies to his confine. This, if you want to look at it this way, this is an example of Elizabethan or Shakespearean folktale. That the dead, around the witching time of night, get up and walk the earth. And when the cock crows, that's time for them to go back to bed. What did we see in Midsummer Night's Dream? When are the elves / fairies doing their thing? Nighttime. And when Aurora comes, we saw in that scene with Puck and Theseus, that's kind of when they go off. Okay? Marcellus then adds another bit of Elizabethan folklore. Some say that ever against that season comes wherein our Savior's birth is celebrated, Christmas time, this bird of dawning singeth all night. And then they say no spirit dare stir abroad. That is, the rooster crows all night long during Christmas time. Why? So the dead can't come up and disturb the celebrations, the revelry and such. The nights are wholesome, then no planets strike. Astrology. No fairy takes what? Takes a child from a bed and switches it with their own. Changelings don't occur. Nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is that time. Okay? John Milton talks about this very idea with his little poem, Hymn on the Morning of Christ's Nativity, I think it's called. Horatio, so have I heard and do in part believe it. Okay? So he says, let's go talk to Hamlet. Let's go tell him. And then we get 1-2. Where we have the king enter in all his glory. This is one of the things I like about Branaugh's film. He gets this part really, really well. I generally don't like Branaugh's film. It's about the only Shakespeare thing he's done that I don't care about. So, king comes in, big long speech. This would be a great speech to memorize. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it us be fitted to bear our hearts in grief and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe, and we all be sorry for Hamlet's death. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. That is, we think about Hamlet's death, but we also think of ourselves at the same time. Why? You have to go on living, which is going to be the point of this kind of part of this scene. So what do? Thinking of ourselves, therefore our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress, that is, joined with, okay, to this warlike state, have we as 'twere with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a dropping eye, with mirth and funeral, and with dirge and marriage, in equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. So, how did we, in that contracted brow of woe, the state mourning for Hamlet Sr., overcome that woe? We had a wedding. We had a state wedding. It'd be like, say one of Charles's sons wasn't married. Say William wasn't married. And the queen dies. We will do what with the national mourning for the queen? We'll get Will married the next day. Not quite. How long has it been since Hamlet died? Previous king. It varies depending on who's talking. Anywhere from 2 to 4 months. Okay? So, does he say, I married her because I'm the king, damn it, and I can do whatever I want? No. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms. That is, you guys were counselors to this. You were advisors, which have freely gone with this affair along, and you agreed to it. For all thanks. Okay? So, he goes on and talks about Fortinbras, Cornelius, and Voltimand come in. He sends them off. Laertes comes in, and the king says to Laertes, what do you want to do? Laertes says, I want to go back to school. Where is Laertes at school? France. Okay? He says, you have your father's, blessing? He says, yes. And then they address Hamlet. Line 64. But now my cousin Hamlet and my son. And look at Hamlet's reply. A little more than kin and less than kind. Now, in most editions, there's a word in parentheses, usually in italics, before Hamlet's response. Aside. In most editions, that line by Hamlet is not a response to the king. It's an address to the audience. So the audience hear Hamlet say, a little more than kin and less than kind. But the king and Gertrude and nobody else on the stage do. Why? Why should that be an aside? Or maybe it shouldn't. Why would some suggest it as an aside? What does it mean? A little more than kin and less than kind. Well, what did the king call him? But now my cousin Hamlet. He's not his cousin, right? Cousin's just a term of family relation. It doesn't have to mean first cousin. It can mean third cousin 9 times removed. You are just a member of my clan, so to speak. Okay? Hamlet turns that and says, a little more than kin. We're not just all part of the one big happy family. What are they? Nephew, uncle. That's a pretty strong relationship in Germanic circles. It's close relationship. Okay? And less than kind. What do we mean when we say something like, what kind of thing is this? What kind of phone? What type? What is its nature? That's what we're asking. Okay? So, in less than kind. See, I'm not like you. Kind means both, in Shakespeare's day, like we use it, that's kind of you, meaning that's nice of you, but it also means the essence or nature of a thing. What type of thing is it? In less than kind. You are unnatural, is what he's telling Claudius. A little more than kin. Yeah, we're a little closer than just distant family relation. But I'm not at all like you. King, how is it that the clouds still hang on you? What did you mean? What clouds?
So why you still sad your dad's dead?
Why are you still sad your dad's dead? If you ever saw the old Disney Winnie the Pooh cartoons, who always walks around with a cloud over his head? It's always raining. Eeyore. That's what he means. Okay? Not so, my lord. I am too much in the sun. He's in Denmark. He's not too much in the sun. Not that sun. So what sun is he talking about? Anybody know what the nickname of Louis XIV of France was? The Sun King. Why? Because the king or queen, Elizabeth, it applied to her. She applied it to herself. The king or queen, the ruling monarch, is the sun of the state. S-U-N. He or she is the light of the state. Okay? The state, to use that image we used the other day, the state is a sphere. The monarch is the ruling, guiding intelligence. So when Hamlet says, not so, my lord, I'm too much in the sun, what's he getting at? I gotta get away from here. I am too close to you. I'm too much in your presence. Queen. Remember, queen is also what? Mother. Mom. Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend of Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. Okay, so be friendly to Denmark. What does she mean on Denmark? She doesn't mean the country. The king. Okay. Using the general thing to apply to the specific.
I've always wondered about that line because her husband, her first husband, Hamlet's dad, died, 2-4 months ago? And she goes, just be happy. Be happy now that your dad's dead and my husband is dead and that everything's dead.
Well, Hamlet's going to address that in a pretty long speech that comes up fairly soon. Frailty, thy name is woman. So, do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. What is she talking about? Is Hamlet walking around Denmark with a shovel, trying to find his dear old dead dad? No. What's he doing? He's like this all the time. He's dressed all in black. His lids are veiled because people can't see his eyes, because his face is towards the ground. And she says, it's like you are seeking for him down there. Okay? Thou know'st 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. Okay, and I never caught this before. Shakespeare is going to use that idea of passing through nature, coming out on the other end to eternity. Nature, okay, is like a giant mouth. What's on the other end? What does that do to you as you go through nature? Shakespeare's going to talk about this later on. He's going to talk about a king going through the guts of a beggar and coming out the other end. Okay? Now, Hamlet says, yeah, it's common. That is, you're right. Everybody that lives dies. Right? So deal with it. Well, if it is, Why seems it so particular with thee? If that's true, Hamlet, why does it seem particular? What does she mean, particular? I don't remember. There's a book in the gloss there. Personal. Yeah, that's what it means. Personal. It also means kind of special with you. Yeah, I mean, Voltimand isn't mourning dead Hamlet's, previous Hamlet's death, dead Hamlet's death. Cornelius isn't mourning Hamlet's death. Still, why are you? And we get our first real good introduction to Hamlet. It's not a very long speech, but I mean, we could spend probably 2 class periods just unpacking this, about 10 lines. Seems, madam? Now, I know I beat this horse so that there's no skin left on the body. What does seems mean? Always. What kind of verb is it? Don't know if it is or not. It's a subjunctive. Condition contrary to fact. Condition contrary to fact. Donald Trump seems like a very faithful husband. Everyone knows that's a condition contrary to fact. How do we know? Because he notified his first wife that he was cheating on her by putting a newspaper article on the bed that talked about him cheating with another woman. I mean, that's pretty low, okay? So, condition contrary. Seems, madam? Notice, that's a question. He's like, don't talk about seems with me, woman. Nay, it is. It is particular with me. I know not seems. What's he saying? Seems also implies what? Okay, we've got seeing, watching, observing, spying as a set of themes. How about appearances versus reality? Seems versus what is. The play began with what? A seeming. A ghost. Horatio doesn't believe it until he sees it with his own 2 eyes. Hamlet, I know not seems. I don't know appearances. And notice both of these imply what? What do you have to do to figure out these? You got to see, you have to observe, you have to watch. Okay? 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother. Yeah, he is being sarcastic there with good mother. Nor customary suits of solemn black. That's where he tells us. He's Johnny Cash, you know. He's the man in black all the time. Nor windy suspiration of forced breath. What's he always doing? Sighing. No, nor the fruitful river in the eye. Tears, nor the dejected behavior of the visage. His face is always on the verge of just breaking down. Together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. Why? He says, my inky cloak, my customary suits, my forced breath, my, tearing eyes, my dejected behavior, all these what? These indeed seem. How so? For they are actions that a man might play, as we will see with the players later on, when we get to play within the play. Anyone, if you're a good actor, you can do what? Or a really good politician. Bill Clinton was the master of this. You could cry on the spot. somebody says cry, and the tears just start flowing. Okay? That's what he means. So part of appearances versus reality, play acting, versus what?
Real behavior.
Realness? Real behavior? Authenticity? Oh, I like that. Authenticity. It's A-U-T. I know it doesn't look like it. Okay? But I have that within which passes show. Passes. It overcomes mere play acting, mere appearances. These, the clothes, the tears, the sighs, these but the trappings and the suits of woe. Trappings and suits. These are, to use a phrase that or a juxtaposition that we used earlier in the semester, these are the accidents within is his real substance of woe. Okay? The king. 'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet. Now, pause here for a moment. Go back to the queen for a second, line 68. Look at the pronouns she uses to address Hamlet. Thy, thine, thy, thou. Okay? And now the king speaks to him and uses why forms. Your nature, your father, you must know, your father. Go down to 106, you throw, 109, you are. Okay? So why does Shakespeare use the different forms? In Shakespeare's day, the TH forms were already relatively archaic. People used you, your, for the most part, in everyday, ordinary, colloquial speech. Okay? So if they were to pray the Lord's Prayer, they wouldn't say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. They'd say, Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed is your name. If they were talking colloquially, not quoting the King James. Okay? In Shakespeare's plays, the TH forms and the Y forms indicate things about social status and about who you're addressing. Okay? So, the Y forms, I shouldn't have talked about a mote in my eye because I got something in my eye. The Y forms are used to address a superior, whether of social status or of age. Okay? So someone older than yourself, or someone in a higher social status than yourself. They also indicate politeness and formality. These are the Y forms. Okay? And it's also used in the upper class among equals. You know, notice, the king just used all Y forms with Hamlet. Is that because they're kind of equals? Well, king, prince, close. Same social status? Yes. Okay. Formality? Yes. The queen used TH forms. TH forms are used by older people to younger people, and by socially superior people to socially inferior people. So is she looking down at her son for being inferior? No. Because the TH form is also used in intimate occasions within members of a family, for example. So when the king doesn't use TH forms, that's also indicating there's not the intimacy that there is between Hamlet and his mother. It's formal and polite. Right? So, what does the king say? "'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father, but you must know your father lost a father, that father lost his. Survivor bound in filial obligation for some term to do obsequious sorrow. But to persever in obstinate condolement is a course of impious or impious stubbornness." What does impious mean? What does pious mean? Strong faith, strong practice of faith. So impious would be against religion, against faith. Blasphemous, almost. So, to persever, to act like you are, is to be impious. It goes against God. What else? "'Tis unmanly grief." Quit being a sissy, Hamlet. Grow up. "It shows a will most incorrect to heaven." You don't want to go against God. "A heart unfortified," you're weak. "A mind impatient," that is, a mind not able or willing to endure patiently. "And understanding simple," you're an idiot. Literal idiot, not, don't be a jerk, but moronic, low IQ, and unschooled. So, what has he just said about Hamlet? Quit being such a loser. Man up. Come on. Quit crying, you little baby. Suck it up. Face it like a man. Your dad died. Big deal. His father died. Your dad got on with life. His father died before him. He got on with life. Because if they hadn't, you wouldn't be here. That's what he's saying. Okay? So, he says, "Let me be like a father to you. Don't go back to Wittenberg. We want you to stay here." How old is Hamlet? He's a university student, right? How old are most university students? Early 20s, maybe late teens. We find out in the play. We're given his exact age. So the queen says, "Let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I can stay." And he says, "I will obey you." Okay? So everybody leaves but Hamlet. And we get his first soliloquy. "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. Oh, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on it, fie. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed." Where have we heard that before? John of Gaunt uses that same image. "Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent. That was to this Hyperion to a satyr." Who's Hyperion? The sun god in the Titans period. Before the gods of Olympus. Okay? What's a satyr? Half goat, half man. So, a god, my father. 2, think of great chain of being. Where's the Hyperion on that? He's up towards the top. He's in the angelic realm, if you want. A satyr? Between human and beast. You don't want to go down. You want to go up on the great chain of being. The escalator to excellence, so to speak. why she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month. Now there he implies he's only been dead a month. Let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, etc., etc. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month. Ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married, oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Why does he conclude, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue? Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt. Now, sullied is what the best of, I can't remember which one it is. There are 3 quarto versions of this play. And those were printed in, I don't remember, 1602, 1606, and 1603, okay? One of them is pretty bad. It's probably a memorial reconstruction. The other 2 are better. All 3 of them differ from the first folio version. That is, all 4 texts differ. Some of them have entire scenes missing. Others have entire scenes added. Okay? The first folio is usually taken to be the most reliable for most of Shakespeare's texts, but not all of them. The first folio reads, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt. In textual editing, textual criticism, there is a principle called lectio difficilior, which means the more difficult reading. Okay? And what the idea behind this principle is if you have 2 variants, if you have 2 readings of a text, and they vary, usually the one that is the author's and not a scribal corruption is the more difficult of the 2. Because a scribe is not apt to make something more difficult. A scribe is more apt to simplify. That is, because a scribe might find something difficult and not understand it. And so what does a scribe do? Dumbs it down. Okay. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. That's pretty easy, right? Because you take something solid and you render it down. Oh, that this too sullied flesh. That's the more difficult reason. Why? What's the difference between sullied, L-I-E-D, and solid? What does sullied mean? To sully something. To dirty it. Oh, that this too dirtied, stained. Use a word Hamlet will use later, and the Ghost will use later. Tainted flesh would do what? Melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. What's he talking about? What's the image being created? I need a chemistry major. Okay, could be ice. The melt doesn't simply mean you take something that's frozen. Like you can melt this plastic bottle, right? Okay. So you melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Anybody in here like whiskey, bourbon, any kind of clear spirit alcohol, anything that's not beer or wine? Well, what do you do when you make whiskey or bourbon? What's part of the process? The distilling process, right? Okay. So you distill you take a pot of water and you boil it. What happens to the water when it boils? It evaporates. So, because you want to take the material from the mash, the alcohol, you put a lid on it, and then you do what? You have a coiled tube What does the evaporation do in that coiled tube? It condenses. So what comes out of the tube? Dew. D-E-W. Condensed liquid. What is that condensed liquid? Let's use water, not alcohol. It's pure. It's pure. The boiling has done what? Removed impurities. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Oh, that I could be purified. I could get rid of all the excess, all the crap of myself. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. What's self-slaughter? Suicide. It's literally what that means. What's the canon against self-slaughter? If you're in the church, you can't commit suicide. That is the unforgivable sin. It's the sin against the Holy Spirit. Why? You can't repent. You can't go, sorry, God, forgive me for what I'm about to do. Doesn't work that way. You always have to repent after you've done something. And you can't go, sorry. Okay. Notice Act 1. What has Hamlet just introduced into the play? What idea? Suicide. Everybody thinks it's Act 3, Scene 1. To be or not to be, that is the... No. In fact, I'm going to argue that entire speech, it's not a soliloquy. There's at least one other person on stage, possibly more. It's designed for somebody else to hear. Okay? I think at least. So, he's saying right here, I want to die. Both those passages, the first two lines and the second two lines, are both about I want to die. Okay? But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue, but I can't talk about it. So, I'll break my heart. Horatio comes in. They talk back and forth. Hamlet says, what are you doing here? He says, I came to see your father's funeral. He goes, don't lie to me. You came to see my mother's wedding. He goes, yeah, followed hard upon. Like, you know, the funeral was the stop on the way to the church for the wedding. Okay? So they tell Hamlet about the ghost. And Hamlet says, towards the end of that scene, if it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. What does he mean, assume? Exactly. To take the shape of, to appear as, to be a seeing as my father's person. I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. So, don't tell anybody else. Okay? They leave. Hamlet gets another little soliloquy. My father's spirit in arms? That is, armed? All is not well. Duh. I doubt, meaning I expect, some foul play. Would the night were come. Till then, sit still, my soul. Why is he telling his soul to sit still? Okay, if his soul is not still, then what is it? Louder? Moving on? Moving around? Agitated? So, how are you, quote unquote, mentally, if you have an agitated soul? Riddled with anxiety, irrational? Maybe a little crazy? Rattled? Till then, sit still, my soul. Foul deeds will arise. Okay? We get a scene with Laertes and Ophelia. Laertes is the other older brother. And what do they talk about? We've only got 5 minutes. We probably won't even finish this part before then. What do they talk about? Laertes is getting ready to go back off to school. He wants to leave his sister, little sister, with some advice. We're not told how old Ophelia is. She's not a young girl. She's very, at least, I would say, mid to late teens, maybe early 20s. I don't think early 20s is appropriate. I think, well, maybe. Late teens, probably. Which, can then raise some questions when you find out how old Hamlet is. What do they talk about? Hamlet. What about him?
Don't sleep with them.
Don't sleep with him. Just get to the point. Don't give in to him. He says, perhaps he loves you now. Line 14. And now no soil nor coddle doth besmirch the virtue of his will. But you must fear his greatness weighed. What is his greatness? He is what to Denmark? Prince, future king. His future kingness weighed. His will is not his own. Oh, by the way, remember, what was it, Sonnet 137? Will, and all the various meanings of, Shakespeare's using that here too. His will, meaning his desire, his volition, his genitalia, they're not his own. Why not? Because he's the future king of Denmark. He can't think only for himself. He has to think for the kingdom. He may not, as unvalued persons do, carve for himself. For on his choice depends the safety and health of his whole state. This whole state. Safety and health? Because what will Hamlet need to do? Marry and produce an heir. Okay? And therefore must his choice be circumscribed unto the voice and yielding of that body whereof he is the head. Now, that body whereof he is the head, that does metaphorically mean the entire state. But it also means his group of counselors. They're going to have a say in who he marries. Just like when Prince Charles married Diana, that wasn't his decision alone. In fact, I would kind of argue that wasn't his decision. That was Mom's decision. And notice when they found, look at my terminology, when they found Diana, what did she have to be proven to be? Of royal blood. Lady Spencer. Okay? What about when Will married Kate Middleton? Didn't have to do it anymore. Sorry. Louder?
That's why Meghan Markle.
Yeah, what about Harry and Meghan Markle?
Not only
She's not even British.
She's not British. She's a divorce too.
Yeah, she's a divorcee Canadian. Canadian American. How worse can you be? Okay, we'll stop there. And we'll never finish.